My guest again today is Lynne Balzer.
In 1968, the Club of Rome was started, and they wrote a book in 1991 called First Global Revolution, which says one of the things they said in there was, in searching for new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. So they're right there. They were saying what they were planning to do. And then the UN IPCC, which was founded in 1988, announced that by burning hydrocarbons, humans have caused the warming of about 1 degree Celsius since 1850, totally ignoring any other possible causes of this 1 degree warming. Part of their strategy was to hijack environmentalism. And I have that highlighted in red, which I'm going to be doing, throughout this presentation, just to show you how they were doing that. And that was an important cause that most people believe in, to grab the moral high ground. And they took that as exclusively theirs, calling anyone who disagreed with their unproven hypothesis an anti-environmentalist. But their true goals were money, power, and population reduction. Without any real-world data to back up this hypothesis, they claimed that if their dictates were not followed, the Earth's average temperature would increase to dangerous levels in the near future. Now, they made hundreds of predictions about what was going to be happening, and just based on how many have come true, we know that they were the crazy predictions. So I'll just give you a couple examples here. In 1982, Mustafa Tolba, who was the director of the UN Environment Program, warned, quote, "The world faces an ecological disaster as final as nuclear war within a couple of decades, unless governments act now." He predicted that if the world failed to act immediately, there would be, by the turn of the century, an environmental catastrophe which would witness devastation as complete, as irreversible as any nuclear holocaust. And here's a headline from The Guardian in February of 2004. A secret report warns that major European cities will be sunk beneath raging seas as Britain is plunged into a Siberian climate by 2020. And in 2008, James Hansen of NASA predicted that the Arctic would be free of summer ice in 5 to 10 years. Well, did that really happen? That would have been 2013, right? Or 2018. Anyway, here's what actually happened. It did fall off a little bit in 2012, but where we are right now, 2023 and 2024, and of course 2025, you can see that we're right on the mean here. So that never happened. Now, this is an extreme departure from what scientists were saying back in the 1970s. In 1971, a group of NASA scientists estimated that if the percentage of carbon dioxide, which was then about 0.03% of the atmosphere, were doubled, the average temperature of the Earth would rise from 6 to 0.08 of a degree Celsius over a period of 1,000 years due to a positive feedback from increased water vapor. A 1975 paper by Roger Revelle, this was during the Ice Age scare, predicted that the increase in carbon dioxide would result in higher agricultural yields. Now that's interesting. In 1979, a team from the National Academy of Sciences concluded that a doubling of carbon dioxide would cause no measurable temperature rise except for positive feedback from water vapor.
That rise they're talking about in the paragraph 1 over 1,000 years, is that total or is that per some time period or per decade or something? Or it's over the whole 1,000 years?
Over the whole 1,000 years.
The whole 1,000 years. Okay.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
I have never seen that. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have to ask, what changed? Well, during the 1970s and 80s, there was endless discussion by the media over acid rain. The public was told that sulfur dioxide and nitrous oxide gases emitted by coal power plants in the Midwest United States were damaging forests and lakes in the eastern United States. This allowed governments to pass regulations involving the sale of sulfur dioxide permits in cap and trade programs, establishing an entire new market for trading and making a boatload of money for the lobbyists who are positioned to profit. wide acceptance of the Montreal Protocol, banning the use of some chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, that we were told caused a hole in the ozone layer, encouraged environmental activists to call for similar controls on carbon dioxide from the combustion of fossil fuels. Dr. Roger Revelle, a prominent and highly respected scientist and head of the Scripps Institute of Oceanography in California, established the International Geophysical Year in 1957, during which measurements of carbon dioxide began. Dr. Revelle wrote the first modern scientific paper linking human carbon dioxide emissions to rising temperatures. This led to the beginning of the global warming frenzy. In 1968, Al Gore, who later became a U.S. Senator and then Vice President in the Clinton administration, happened to take one of Dr. Revelle's classes at Harvard University. Although he was a poor science student, Gore was so impressed by Revelle's hypothesis on global warming that he made a highly exaggerated version of it, the topic of his 1992 book, Earth in the Balance. In this book, Earth in the Balance, Gore referred to Roger Revelle as his mentor and inspiration to combat the crisis caused by carbon dioxide being emitted by humans. Gore claimed that the increase in carbon dioxide was accelerating the rise in sea level and impacting global temperatures. He said that plant and animal species were disappearing at an alarming rate. He referred to carbon dioxide as pollution and argued that the problems he predicted would result from unsustainable levels of production and consumption by mankind. He also pointed to a growing global population that was depleting resources. He implied that anyone who disagreed with anything in his book was against saving the planet. Gore politicized the global warming issue through his position on the Senate Commerce Committee, where he teamed up with John Kerry. In 1988, he organized a congressional hearing that was planned by Senators Tim Wirth and John Hines to take place on the hottest day of the year, June 23rd. In a PBS Frontline broadcast, Senator Wirth later bragged about how they had planned this hearing. Quote, "We called the Weather Bureau and found out what was historically the hottest day of the summer. So we scheduled a hearing that day, and bingo, it was the hottest day on record in Washington, or close to it. We went in the night before and opened all the windows so that the air conditioning wasn't working inside the room." The star witness, James Hansen of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, he was a climate activist who had taken part in protests, gave a remarkable performance. Hansen claimed that he was 99% certain that the Earth was warmer than at any time in the history of instrumental measurements. Of course, that was a lie, since the climate was warmer during the 1930s Dust Bowl days. We've got to ride the global warming issue. This is what Tim Wirth said. We've got to ride the global warming issue. Even if the theory of global warming is wrong, we will be doing the right thing. Dr. Revelle was alarmed about that Senate hearing, which had caused the issue to explode. He believed that Senators Gore and Wirth were going too far. They took facts as facts, many assumptions about which he was uncertain. So shortly after that hearing, in July of 1988, he wrote a letter to Senator Wirth about this. And in this letter, he stated, quote, "We should be careful not to arouse too much alarm until the rate and amount of warming becomes clearer. It is not yet obvious that this summer's hot weather and droughts are the result of a global climatic change, or simply an example of the uncertainties of climate variability. My own feeling is that we had better wait another 10 years before making confident predictions." Senator Wirth ignored his letter. Just a few days before this, Dr. Revelle had also written a letter to Representative Jim Bates, stating, quote, "Most scientists familiar with the subject are not yet willing to bet that the climate this year is the result of greenhouse warming. As you very well know, climate is highly variable from year to year, and the causes of these variations are not at all well understood. My own personal belief is that we should wait another 10 or 20 years to really be convinced that the greenhouse effect is going to be important for human beings in both positive and negative ways. In early 1991, Roger Revelle, along with doctors Fred Singer and Chauncey Starr, published an article entitled, quote, "What to Do About Greenhouse Warming? Look Before You Leap." In this article, they expressed doubts about the human-caused global warming hypothesis. They warned that more research should be done before taking the kind of drastic action that Gore and others were calling for. According to John Coleman, founder of the Weather Channel, in 1991, Dr. Revelle gave a speech at Bohemian Grove, a legendary club for elite gentlemen in California, in which he apologized for inadvertently leading so many in the wrong direction. He expressed his worries about the fear-mongering that Al Gore and the IPCC were promoting. He knew that the science was flawed. Just a short time later, on July 15, 1991, he died of a heart attack. Although Al Gore claimed that Roger Revelle was the impetus behind his book, Earth in the Balance, the article, What to Do About Greenhouse Warming, Look Before You Leap, proves otherwise. And I want to read you some excerpts from this amazing article. I was just amazed when I read this because so much of it is true. This is what they said. The scientific base for greenhouse warming includes some facts, lots of uncertainty, and just plain lack of knowledge, requiring more observations, better theories, and more extensive calculations. Specifically, there are reliable measurements of the increase in so-called greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere, presumably as a result of human activities. There is uncertainty about the strength of sources and sinks for these gases. For example, their rates of generation and removal. There is major uncertainty and disagreement about whether this increase has caused a change in the climate during the last century. There's also disagreement in the scientific community about predicted future changes as a result of further increases in greenhouse gases. The models used to calculate future climate are not yet good enough because the climate balancing processes are not sufficiently understood, nor are they likely to be good enough until we gain more understanding through observations and experiments. As a consequence, we cannot be sure whether the next century will bring a warming that is negligible or a warming that is significant. Finally, even if there are global warming and associated climate changes, it is debatable whether the consequences will be good or bad. Likely, some places on the planet would benefit and some would suffer. Water vapor turns out to be the most effective greenhouse gas by far. It is not man-made, but is assumed to amplify the warming effects of the gases produced by human activities. We don't really know whether water has increased in the atmosphere or whether it will increase in the future, although that's what all the model calculations assume. Indeed, predictions of future warming depend not only on the amounts, but also on the horizontal and especially the vertical distribution of water, and on whether it will be in the atmosphere in the form of a gas, or as liquid cloud droplets, or as ice particles. The current computer models are not complete enough to test these crucial points. But has there been a climate effect caused by the increase of greenhouse gases in the last decades? The data are ambiguous, to say the least. Advocates for immediate action profess to see a global warming of about 0.5 degrees Celsius since 1880, and point to record global temperatures in the 1980s and the warmest year on record in 1990. Most atmospheric scientists tend to be cautious, however. They call attention to the fact that the greatest temperature increase occurred before the major rise in greenhouse gas concentration. It was followed by a quarter-century decrease between 1940 and 1965, when concern arose about an approaching ice age. And I should add, too, that, that was when the carbon dioxide percentage was going way up, that we were actually having a decrease in temperatures. Following a sharp increase during 1975 to 1980, there has been no clear upward trend during the 80s, despite some very warm individual years and record greenhouse gas increases. Using a technique that eliminates urban heat islands and other local distorting effects, ITS climatologist Thomas Carl and colleagues confirmed the temperature rise before 1940, followed, however, by a general decline. Reginald Newell and colleagues at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, report no substantial change in the global sea surface temperature in the past century. Yet the ocean, because of its much greater heat inertia, should control any atmospheric climate change. Perhaps most interesting are the NOAA studies that document a relative rise in night temperatures in the United States in the last 60 years, while daytime values stayed the same or declined. This is just what one would expect from the increase in atmospheric greenhouse gas concentration. But its consequences, as University of Virginia climatologist Patrick Michaels and others have pointed out, are benign. A longer growing season, fewer frosts, and no increase in soil evaporation. Global temperatures have been declining since the dinosaurs roamed the Earth some 70 million years ago. About 2 million years ago, a new ice age began, most probably as a result of the drift of the continents and the buildup of mountains. Since that time, the Earth has seen 17 or more cycles of glaciation, interrupted by short 10 to 12,000 year interglacial or warm periods. We are now in such an interglacial interval, the Holocene, that started about 10,800 years ago. The onset of the next glacial cycle cannot be very far away. During the past millennium, the Earth experienced a climate optimum around 1100 AD, when Vikings found Greenland to be green and Vinland, Labrador, able to support grape growing. The Little Ice Age found European glaciers advancing well before 1600, and then suddenly retreating, starting in 1860. The warming reported in the global temperature record since 1880 may thus simply be the escape from this Little Ice Age, rather than our entrance into the human greenhouse. Further, there is serious disagreement among the models of the regional distribution of this warming and on where the increased precipitation will go. The models are tuned to give the right mean temperature and seasonal temperature variation, but they fall short of modeling other important atmospheric processes, such as the poleward transport of energy via ocean currents and atmosphere from its source in the equatorial region, nor do they encompass longer scale processes that involve the deep layers of the oceans or the ice and snow in the Earth's cryosphere, nor fine scale processes that involve convection, cloud formation, boundary layers, or that depend on the Earth's detailed topography. So they're really pointing out a lot of things here. It's really an amazing article. We can sum up our conclusions in a simple message. The scientific base for greenhouse warming is too uncertain to justify drastic action at this time. There is little risk in delaying policy responses to this century-old problem, since every expectation that scientific understanding will be substantially improved within the next decade. In this article, they cited Nobel laureate economist William Nordhaus, who conducted a cost-benefit analysis of the measures being pushed by the global warming crowd. In 1990, he wrote, quote, "Those who argue for strong measures to slow greenhouse warming have reached their conclusion without any discernible analysis of the costs and benefits." Nordhaus concluded that there is little to be gained economically from reducing emissions, and that, quote, "the pace and extent of warming is highly uncertain." So that was also part of their article. But in his book, Earth in the Balance, Al Gore described Roger Revelle's views as much more alarmist than the concepts presented in this article. And this is what he said, quote, "The implications of his, Dr. Revelle's words, were startling. We were looking at only 8 years of information. But if this trend continued, human civilization would be forcing a profound and disruptive change in the entire global climate." And on July 6, 1992, an article by Greg Easterbrook of Newsweek magazine discussed this article that Doctors Singer and Starr and Revelle had written. In Earth and the Balance, he claimed that Dr. Revelle, as his mentor at Harvard, alerted him to the global warming crisis. But, noted Easterbrook, Earth and the Balance does not mention that before his death last year, Revelle published a paper that concludes, quote, "The scientific base for greenhouse warming is too uncertain to justify drastic action at this time. There is little risk in delaying policy responses." When the discrepancy between Gore's book and Dr. Revelle's article was raised during the 1990 vice presidential debates, Gore responded that Dr. Revelle's statements had been taken completely out of context. This really embarrassed Al Gore, who was running for vice president. He had to find a way to save face. So in order to save his own reputation, he tried to destroy Dr. Fred Singer's. Shortly after Easterbrook's article came out, Justin Lancaster, another former student of Dr. Revelle, called Dr. Singer and demanded that he remove Dr. Revelle's name from Look Before You Leap. Dr. Singer replied that this would be impossible because in order to do so, he would need Dr. Revelle's permission. And since Dr. Revelle had died, he couldn't give it. So Dr. Lancaster and Anthony Sochi, a member of Gore's staff, began to spread the false story that Dr. Singer had added Dr. Revelle's name to the article to give it credibility. They claimed that Dr. Revelle had been too feeble and senile to have participated in its writing, and even that Fred Singer had added Dr. Revelle's name to the article as a co-author over his objections. In a lengthy letter to the publishers of the Gore volume, who were preparing to republish the article, Anthony Sochi, who worked for Gore, made similar outrageous accusations, requesting that the article be dropped from their publication. Fortunately, the publishers refused to give in to Lancaster and Sochi's demands. Dr. Singer wrote, "My repeated requests to Dr. Lancaster that he cease his defamation and retract his false accusations failed to get an acceptable response. Only then, and encouraged by my wife Candace Crandall, did I file a libel suit against Dr. Lancaster." And then this is how public radio was reporting on this lawsuit. They said Dr. Singer was described as a frequent critic of environmental activists. And here is a part of their report. Lancaster, I see a group of people taking this article, saying it's the last testimony of Roger Revelle, and essentially using it against his career. And I think it's a terrible thing. I'm as close a colleague as anybody on this issue of global warming in the last years of Roger's life, and I'm not going to sit silently and let this happen. The public radio broadcast continued. Lancaster has been far from silent. In 1992, he complained repeatedly about the article to the editors of a book that was to include the controversial paper. Lancaster tried unsuccessfully to block republication of the article, calling it misleading and unscholarly. He claimed that Fred Singer had taken advantage of Revelle at a time when he was weak. When the article was written, Revelle was 81 and had recently undergone open-heart surgery. Though Lancaster admits Revelle's mind remained sharp until the end, Lancaster suggested in his letters that Singer had pressured Revelle into accepting co-authorship so Singer could use the article for political purposes in his fight against environmentalists trying to combat global warming. And it's because of these statements that Fred Singer is suing Lancaster for libel. Justin Lancaster, counters that he has galley proofs showing that some of Revelle's desired changes in the manuscript never made it into the final version. But co-author Chauncey Starr, who is not a party to the lawsuit, says that's not true. Starr, quote, "The very last changes were made by Roger Revelle and were sent to me for approval. And I approved them, and that's what was printed in the article. There was no question that he was actively engaged, and that whatever appeared in that article he agreed with. Dr. Chauncey Starr was a nuclear engineer, and he had worked on the Manhattan Project, and he was the fourth president of the American Nuclear Society, so he was a very well-known and respected scientist." In the lawsuit's discovery process, it came out that Lancaster had been fully aware of Dr. Revelle's contribution to the article, and Dr. Revelle's calendar in the months before his death showed a full schedule of speaking engagements, conferences, and travel. This indicated that Dr. Revelle was not a cognitively impaired invalid, as Lancaster and Sochi were claiming. The court found a lot of evidence linking Dr. Lancaster to Senator Gore. Lancaster had prepared 7 drafts for a reply to the New Republic in response to Mr. Easterbrook's article, and then run them by the senator's staff. On one fact, he asked, "Is this close to what the senator had in mind?" From the beginning of this controversy, Dr. Lancaster had been aware that Dr. Singer still had the galley proofs of the Cosmos article with Dr. Revelle's handwritten corrections and annotations in the margins showing his active participation in the preparation of the article. Dr. Lancaster's deposition indicated that he had never bothered to contact Chauncey Starr, the other co-author of Look Before You Leap, but had instead focused his attention on Dr. Singer. This is probably because Dr. Singer had publicly affirmed his skepticism on global warming alarmism. In February of 1994, journalist Ted Koppel revealed on his TV program Nightline that Al Gore, who now was vice president, had called and asked him to investigate the political and economic forces behind the anti-environmental movement, especially that doctors, Singer, and other global warming skeptics had received money from the coal industry. Ted Koppel asked Gore, "Is this a case of industry supporting scientists who happen to hold sympathetic views, or scientists adapting their views to accommodate industry?" Ted Koppel continued, "There is some irony in the fact that Vice President Gore, one of the most scientifically literate men sit in the White House in this century, is resorting to political means to achieve what should ultimately be resolved on a purely scientific basis. The measure of good science is neither the politics of a scientist nor the people with whom the scientist associates. It is the immersion of hypotheses into the acid of truth. That's the hard way to do it, but it's the only way that works." This attempt to use Mr. Koppel to vilify skeptical scientists brought criticism down on Al Gore. Lancaster's attorneys indicated that they were ready to have him sign a retraction and apology for the lies he had told about Dr. Singer. So in his retraction and apology, Dr. Lancaster testified to the court, quote, "The late Professor Roger Revelle was a true and voluntary co-author of the article entitled What to Do About Greenhouse Warming, Look Before You Leap, along with Professor S. Fred Singer and Chauncey Starr, PhD. I retract as being unwarranted any and all statements, oral or written, I have made, which state or imply that Professor Revelle was not a true and voluntary co-author in the Cosmos article, or which in any other way impugn or malign the conduct or motives of Professor Singer with regard to the Cosmos article. I agree not to make any such statements in the future, and I apologize to Professor Singer for the pain my conduct has caused him and for any damage that I may have caused to his reputation." But after the lawsuit had been concluded, despite his sworn statement to the court, "I agree not to make any such statements in the future," Lancaster failed to honor this retraction and repeated his charges. He was thus admitting that he had lied under oath, but then he expected everyone to believe that he didn't lie. In his retraction, he had admitted that Professor Revelle was a true co-author of the paper, but then, contrary to these words, he insisted, quote, Revelle did not write it, and Revelle cannot be an author. So he was going around saying that even after this lawsuit, right? He retracted his retraction, despite documentary evidence in Revelle's own handwriting and numerous testimonials from others that Revelle did contribute to the article. Dr. Pat Michaels, a global warming skeptic, expressed his opinion that Justin Lancaster and Al Gore, Dr. Revelle's former students, were very disrespectful of their late professor. He said, to me, it is astounding, it's absolutely astounding that we're having the living trying to take the names of the dead off papers that they wrote because the living don't agree with what the dead said when they authored the paper. That's straight out of a rather frightening book by George Orwell. But now, as you might expect, and this is why I'm presenting all this, because guess what they're doing now, of course? They have covered this whole thing up. Google and other allies of the United Nations and the World Economic Forum want you to believe the opposite of what actually happened. When you put the keywords Revelle, Gore, and Singer into a Google search, many articles such as this one from OSS, Open Source Systems, surface. And this website contends, quote, the 1991 Cosmos paper, What to Do About Greenhouse Warming, Look Before You Leap, is not Revelle's article. That is a myth, perpetrated at first by a few participants, and now being spread by the many people they have misled. Revelle did not write it. The Cosmos article is S. Fred Singer's work. Singer may urge that Revelle was a co-author technically, simply because he allowed his name to be used. These words are presented as fact, whereas the opposite is actually the truth, as evidenced by a conclusion by a court of law that investigated the entire affair and which had determined that the men who were claiming otherwise had lied. A statement in Dr. Revelle's 1988 letter to Senator Wirth, which I've already read, right, is almost identical to one that was made in the first page of Look Before You Leap. In that letter, Dr. Revelle told Senator Wirth, my own feeling is that we had better wait another 10 years before making confident predictions. Look Before You Leap states, quote, there is little risk in delaying policy responses to this century-old problem, since there's every expectation that scientific understanding will be substantially improved within the next decade. So there we have, within the next decade, and over here we have another 10 years, right? Well, that's very important. Open Source Systems even claims that Dr. Revelle's family verified what they are saying, but Dr. Revelle's daughter verified the truth, writing that although her father was concerned about global warming, he didn't believe that there was an urgent need to take drastic action and that more study was needed first. He recommended moderate action, such as more nuclear power and replacing some coal and oil with natural gas. He thought a carbon tax was needed, she wrote. So he did believe in some action. And here are some other online sources that are denying the truth about this. The Yale Review, Naomi Oreskes, I don't know if I pronounced her name properly. Wikipedia, Pomona College, and The Smog. That's just some of the websites that are saying this. In 2006, Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway wrote a book entitled Merchants of Doubt, in which they vilified scientists who they said cast doubt on well-established scientific findings. They obviously didn't understand that science without skepticism isn't science. In this book, they highlighted this controversy between Justin Lancaster and Fred Singer, stating, Singer actively worked to discredit Revelle's work, claiming that Revelle's papers clearly demonstrate that he had never changed his mind about global warming. So I wanted to know if that really is true. So I went back and I checked lot of things that Dr. Revelle was saying and writing in the 10-year period preceding this article that they wrote. In the November 1982 Scientific American Letters to the Editors, Revelle wrote, "We must conclude that until a warming trend that exceeds the noise level of natural climatic fluctuations becomes clearly evident, there will be considerable uncertainty and a diversity of opinions about the amplitude of the climatic effects of increased atmospheric carbon dioxide. If the modelers are correct, such a signal should be detectable within the next 10 or 15 years." This was written a full 9 years before the article Look Before You Leap. So that's what he was saying back then. Open source systems also queried, did S. Fred Singer trick Revelle into an association to achieve an agenda? When the sequence of events is examined, the intentions seem to implicate his agenda. However, the truth is that Drs. Singer and Revelle were longtime professional associates, and they were friends too. And they were jointly involved in several projects, among them a 1968 symposium under the auspices of the American Association for the Advancement of Science on the global effects of environmental pollution. They were also both science advisors to the Department of the Interior. In the 1970s, Dr. Revelle invited Dr. Singer to spend a few months as his guest at the Center for Population Studies at Harvard, where he was a visiting professor. And during that time, Dr. Singer even stayed at Dr. Revelle's home for a few weeks. Dr. Singer later served on an AAAS committee chaired by Dr. Revelle. After Dr. Revelle's return to California, Dr. Singer would visit him at the Scripps Institution from time to time. At the AAAS annual convention in February of 1990, they met at breakfast and jointly decided to write the article, Look Before You Leap. So does that sound like Fred's tricking Revelle into an association? I don't think so. And also, he gave a speech, Dr. Revelle gave a speech back in 1980, and this is still online. You can listen to this. So I listened to his entire speech, and this is basically what he said. He said, carbon dioxide is the world's most important chemical compound. He said, an increase in the percentage of carbon dioxide could cause more low clouds, increasing the albedo, or reflectivity, and thus cooling the planet. He verified the existence of the medieval warm period in the Little Ice Age. And he said the warming from 1910 to 1940 was not caused by increased carbon dioxide emissions. During the 1960s cool down, the percentage of carbon dioxide was rising. And he was saying all these things. He said computer models are grossly inaccurate because they don't take the ocean into account in any realistic way. He said they treat the ocean as a swamp. Increased photosynthesis from the rise in the percentage of carbon dioxide would boost agricultural yields and benefit everyone. And that's something that they don't even want to talk about now. They don't want to admit that there are some positive benefits of added carbon dioxide, right? Much more research was needed, he said, and more would be understood in 10 to 15 years. So he was saying all this in 1980, which is a full 10 years before they wrote that article. Does this sound like the points made in Al Gore's book, Earth in the Balance? I don't think so. And here's part of an interview of Dr. Revelle by Omni magazine in March of 1984, which was 7 years before the contested 1991 article. Omni said, a problem that has occupied your attention for many years is the increasing levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which could cause the Earth's climate to become warmer. Is this actually happening? Revelle, I estimate that the total increase in carbon dioxide over the past 100 years has been about 21%. But whether the increase will lead to a significant rise in global temperature, we can't absolutely say. And then Omni said, well, if it happens, what would the warming of the Earth mean to us? Revelle said, there may be a lot of effects. Increased carbon dioxide in the air acts like a fertilizer for plants. You get more plant growth. Increasing carbon dioxide levels also affects water transpiration, causing plants to close their pores and sweat less. That means plants will be able to grow in drier climates. And Omni said, Does the increase in carbon dioxide have anything to do with people saying the weather is getting worse? Revelle said, people are always saying the weather's getting worse. Actually, the carbon dioxide increase is predicted to temper weather extremes. Well, in February of 1990, Dr. Revelle gave a keynote speech at a meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And here is a part of that speech. He said, research and observations over the next 10 to 20 years should give us a much better idea of the likely magnitude of atmospheric and oceanic warming during the 21st century. So he keeps saying the same thing, we need to wait like 10 or 20 years, right? Combustion of methane, which is natural gas, produces about twice as much energy per gram of carbon dioxide as does the combustion of coal, and about 50% more than combustion of oil. It is also a clean, relatively non-polluting fuel. We need to expand greatly and to conserve the world reserves of methane, particularly those of the United States. This may very well involve greater understanding of its modes of formation and accumulation. In stark contrast was Gore's 2006 documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, which is based on a slide that he had presented many times. It soared in the charts to become the highest-earning documentary film in history, and it's led to 2 Oscars and a Nobel Peace Prize. And the book version was a runaway bestseller. The publicity or release for An Inconvenient Truth reads, quote, humanity is sitting on a ticking time bomb. If the vast majority of the world's scientists are right, we have just 10 years to avert a major catastrophe that could send our entire planet into a tailspin of epic destruction involving extreme weather, floods, droughts, epidemics, and killer heat waves beyond anything we have ever experienced. Does this sound like what Roger Revelle was saying? Al Gore, who is not a scientist, has received monumental acclaim, including 2 Oscars, a Nobel Prize, and millions of dollars for his books and his documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, which is riddled with many serious errors. In 2007, he told the House Energy and Science Committee, as soon as carbon has a price, you're going to see a wave of investment in it. The company he started, Generation Management, which deals in cap and trade, has helped raise his net worth from $1.7 million to over $300 million. Well, what can we learn from all this? The bottom line, Al Gore is not a scientist. He either failed to understand Dr. Revelle's ideas or purposely misrepresented them. The misinformation that he pushed influenced many policymakers like John Hines, Tim Wirth, and others who simply took him at his word without checking any facts. Gore and his accomplices tried to cover up the article, What to Do About Greenhouse Warming, Look Before You Leap, and then lied about who wrote it. If Al Gore had really respected Dr. Revelle, he would have stayed in touch with him and made sure he understood his ideas before writing his book. He knew that a tremendous profit could be made from global warming, fear-mongering, since he himself has made over $300 million from doing this. The original global warming fear-mongers literally hijacked the very popular issue, environmentalism, by equating it with their unproven hypothesis. They purposely smeared those who disagreed with their premise by calling them anti-environmentalists and oil company shills. There was a tremendous amount of money behind this propaganda campaign that was aided by the mainstream media. And this is further discussed in my former presentation, Cashing In on Climate Change, a Tom Nelson podcast. So this proves that human-caused climate change is not only based on incorrect science, but was started by a series of lies and cover-ups. The people who engineered this knew exactly what they were doing. The more often a piece of information, even a falsehood, is repeated, the more believable it becomes. Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi minister of propaganda, said, "If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. Another example, Saul Alinsky wrote Rules for Radicals, which promotes the tactic of loudly and shamelessly repeating a lie again and again. There is a simple solution to this problem. Think for yourself, research and compare facts, and arrive at your own conclusions based on science, facts, and reason. Lazy thinking leads to quick and easy conclusions. Just a small fraction of the human population has the will and is mentally strong enough to challenge the popular and easy answers that are in many cases just flat out wrong. And this is what Thomas Jefferson said, "I have sworn before the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man." And if you would like to know more about what's been happening, you might want to check my book, Exposing the Great Climate Change Lie. And I guess that's the end of my podcast.
I just want to compliment you on what you did here because, I consider myself plugged in, but you presented all sorts of detail that I'd never seen before. So how did you uncover it?
First of all, I always liked Fred Seitz because I dedicated my book. I'm sorry, I meant to say Fred Singer.
Fred Singer, yeah.
I dedicated my book to him. And so when I was originally learning about the cash, the money involved in all this, and then this subject came up about Singer and Lancaster. So I wanted to examine that a little bit further and get the details because I think it's really interesting.
Did you ever have a chance to see Dr. Singer in person at a conference or anything?
No, unfortunately, I didn't. He died several years ago, so we won't have that opportunity.
I'll put your slides up on Substack, and let's see what else. Oh, just as you were talking, I looked it up, so we can see that 1980 Revelle speech. I think my last podcast guest, Robert Ian Holmes, he has a copy of that speech on his channel.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, so I'll put that link in the show description so people can watch it.
That's great. I guess this all ties in with other lies and other things that were going on at the time. But one of them is the immense amount of money that was involved, that was made available for propaganda and the mainstream media going right along with that.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting what you put in there about public radio. The way they covered it was so dishonest. Yeah. Thank you very much, Lynne Balzer.
Okay. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your putting me on your podcast.